You are the one who killed my son. Not me, not heart disease, but your indifference, Charles." My wife's voice rang out across the crowded cemetery at the very moment our son's casket was being lowered into the ground. I went numb. Every pair of eyes turned toward me as if they were looking at a murderer. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I stood there, listening to each accusation like a death sentence handed down to my own life. If you're listening to this story, please leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. A like, a single share from you could help this story reach many more people. My name is Charles Miller, and I'm 68 years old. I spent my entire life as a bridge and highway engineer, the kind of man who believed that if you could build something solid out of concrete and steel, then your family would naturally be just as solid. I'm retired now, but the habit of living like a machine is still there. I remember every number, every blueprint, every deadline from back then. There is only one thing I don't remember clearly enough, and I have to admit that from the very beginning, my son's face when he needed me the most. Henry Miller, 34 years old. He was my only son. A few days before the funeral, I got a call just before dawn. Lucy called. My wife was sobbing so hard it sounded like her lungs were being crushed. "Charles, Henry isn't okay. You have to come to the hospital right now." I drove like a sleepwalker through the thin autumn morning fog, my hands gripping the steering wheel without feeling it. When I arrived, the hospital hallway was cold like metal. The smell of disinfectant and the sound of gurney wheels rolling across the floor made me feel sick. Lucy threw her arms around me, her lips trembling, then said in a strangely weightless voice, as if she were talking about something that had happened to someone else, "He's gone." The doctor said Henry had suffered a heart attack in his sleep. Sudden, no warning. They used a lot of medical terms, but in the end it all came down to one simple sentence I couldn't understand. A healthy 34-year-old man disappeared overnight. I stood in front of the bed covered with a white sheet, staring at the familiar shape beneath it, while my brain refused to accept it. I couldn't cry. I couldn't speak. I only heard Lucy's rapid breathing, the hum of machines somewhere nearby, and then my own heart pounding like a steady knock against a wall. During the days leading up to the funeral, I did everything on autopilot. Called the funeral home, chose the casket, chose the flowers, chose the hymns, chose the service time. Everything felt like a task list for a project. The only difference was that this project had my son's name on it. We lived in a quiet suburban town where neighbors greeted each other with smiles and small talk about the weather, their lawns, and the weekend game. For 40 years, Lucy and I looked like the perfect couple. A tidy house, a clean driveway, Sunday family dinners, Christmas cards sent out on time. Lucy was good at that. She knew how to make everything look perfect. She ran the household, the spending, the schedules, and almost everything related to Henry when he was growing up. I handled the visible part, going to work, earning money, paying taxes, paying off loans, buying cars, fixing the roof. I told myself that was a man's responsibility. Henry grew up gentle and quiet, with the same reserved nature I had. He studied technology and worked at a software company in a city a little over an hour's drive away. When he moved out on his own, I thought it was normal. A grown son needs space. He'll call when he needs something. That's what I told myself, and Lucy never gave me a reason to worry. "He's fine, Charles. Your son is just quiet." So I believed her. I believed her until I stood beside the grave. That day the wind was cold. The sky was gray, the thin gray kind that makes everything look dusted over. A lot of people came. Henry's former co-workers, a few college friends, neighbors, relatives. I heard people call my name, shake my hand, offer condolences. I nodded. I thanked them like a machine. I stood close to Lucy. She wore black clothes, a black hat, a black scarf, like a scene from a movie. When the casket was lowered, I heard the ropes pull tight, the sound of dirt and gravel, and a silence that stretched endlessly. I thought Lucy would collapse from grief, and I prepared to reach out and catch her, but she spun toward me. Her finger was shaking, but her voice was sharp as a blade. She screamed that sentence in front of everyone. Then she kept going, like she was reading an indictment. She said I was never there for our son, that I always chose work, that Henry lived in loneliness, waiting for me to look at him one more time, waiting for a phone call I never made at the right moment, that in the end his heart broke from sadness and abandonment. She used the word indifference like a hammer smashing straight into my head. No one spoke. Someone opened their mouth as if to say something, then stopped. I looked down at my hands, the hands that had drawn hundreds of designs, measured thousands of steel piles, and suddenly felt useless. I wanted to argue, but my throat locked up. I wanted to scream that I was hurting too, that I had lost my son too, that I was standing right there, but I couldn't. I just stood there, absorbing every changing look. And the worst part was that somewhere deep inside, I believed her. I hadn't been there enough for Henry. I had thought paying tuition, buying his first car, and covering every bill was how you showed love. I thought if my son needed me, he would say so. But Henry wasn't the kind of person who spoke up, and I wasn't the kind of person who asked. So I stood there and let Lucy turn me into the guilty one, and I carried that guilt like a stone on my chest. After the funeral, everything slid downhill so fast I barely understood what was happening. Lucy stopped calling me honey. She used my name like I was a stranger. She slept in a separate room. She locked drawers she had never locked before. She took phone calls on the porch at night when she thought I couldn't hear. When I asked, she replied coldly, "It doesn't concern you." Then the insurance company called. Henry had a life insurance policy worth $600,000. The sole beneficiary was Lucy. I didn't understand. I had never heard Henry mention it. Lucy signed the papers and received the money faster than I expected. And after she got it, she changed completely. 3 days later, she placed a folder in front of me and said evenly, without a hint of hesitation, "I want a divorce, and I want you out of the house immediately." I laughed, thinking it was shock talking. The house was in my name. I bought it with my own earnings. I had repaired every corner, replaced every plank of wood, planted every tree. I said that. Lucy didn't blink. She pulled out another sheet of paper, as if it had been prepared in advance. She said Henry had left a note saying he didn't forgive me. She said, if necessary, she would take me to court, accuse me of emotional abuse for abandoning the family, and with the things she had shouted at the funeral as testimony, she could make me lose everything. I sank into the chair like someone who had been struck, not because I believed I had broken the law, but because I believed I truly was at fault. I looked at Lucy, searching for the woman who used to make my coffee every morning, who used to smile when I told stories from the job site, who used to hold Henry when he was little. But the woman in front of me had eyes as cold as glass. I didn't fight. I packed a few things, an old suitcase, a few sets of clothes, a photo album, and a small toolbox I carried out of habit. Lucy leaned against the door frame, watching me zip the suitcase shut. She didn't cry. She didn't say goodbye. She only said, "Go, Charles. You've done enough." I left the house like a man exiled from his own life. I rented a cheap studio on the other side of town. One small room, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom that smelled damp. The first night, I lay on the bed listening to a neighbor's television. Laughter came through the thin walls like a mockery. I opened a bottle of cheap bourbon and took a long swallow. Then another. I drank so I wouldn't think. I drank so I wouldn't hear myself breathing. The weeks that followed blurred together. I slept until noon. I drank from noon until night. I stared at my phone and set it down, hoping someone would call. No one did. Friends avoided me like I carried bad luck. Acquaintances who ran into me at the grocery store lowered their heads and hurried away. Maybe they believed Lucy. Maybe they thought I was such a terrible father that I had killed my son with coldness, and I didn't have the strength to prove otherwise. Until one Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I was about to ignore it. Then I heard a man's voice, polite but firm. "Are you Charles Miller? I'm Henry's landlord. I need you to come collect his belongings. I have to rent the place out again. I've waited long enough." My heart tightened. I had avoided that moment for weeks. I didn't want to step into my son's apartment. I didn't want to see the chair he sat in, the glass he drank from, the jacket hanging by the door. I didn't want to face the truth that Henry had lived, breathed, been afraid or in pain there, without me knowing. But I had no choice. If I didn't come, Henry's things would be boxed up and disappear. And what did I have left besides the last pieces of my son's life? I agreed. My voice was hoarse from alcohol. The man gave me the address, the date and time, then hung up. I sat motionless in the dark studio for a long time. The bottle on the table reflected the weak yellow light. I looked at my reflection in the black television screen. An old man with hollow cheeks and sunken eyes. I thought of Henry, of Lucy's accusation, of the still new grave, and then I stood up as if some invisible thread were pulling me out of the pit. The next day, I drove to Henry's apartment. The building was old, the stairway narrow, no elevator. I climbed to the 3rd floor, each step feeling twice my age. The landlord handed me the key, watching me with a cautious look, like he was witnessing a story he didn't want to be part of. The door opened. Stale air rushed out. Not a rotten smell, just the smell of a place long unoccupied, dust and time. Henry's apartment was neater than I expected. Simple furniture. His computer neatly placed on the desk. A hoodie draped over the back of a chair. In the corner, a potted plant that had withered. I stood in the doorway for a moment, forcing myself to breathe. I had been here before a few times, always in a hurry. I came, ate a quick dinner, asked a few polite questions, then rushed off again, always saying, "Dad's busy." I realized then how much of my son's life this apartment held. I started packing like a man afraid to touch his own emotions. I put books into boxes. I folded clothes. I gathered small items into bags. The silence was broken only by the rustle of paper and cardboard scraping the floor. Then I noticed the large bookcase against the wall. Heavy wood, solid, the kind Henry once said he bought from a second-hand store. I decided to push it aside to clean behind it. I don't know why. Maybe I needed something concrete to hold on to instead of standing still in a room full of memories. I placed both hands on the edge of the bookcase and pushed. It moved inch by inch. Wood scraped softly against the floor. I pushed harder, breathing fast. And right then, when the bookcase shifted about a foot away from the wall, I saw something strange on the white paint. A small metal door, flush with the wall. Painted the same color, so well blended that if it hadn't been hidden, I might never have noticed it. I froze. Cold sweat prickled at the back of my neck. I reached out and touched the metal edge. The cold shot straight into my bones, and my hand began to shake. I stood there staring at the small metal door as if someone had dropped a block of ice onto my chest. Henry wasn't the type to hide things. At least, that's what I had always believed. He lived quietly, went to work, kept to himself. A hidden wall safe didn't belong to that quiet life. I crouched down and looked more closely. The edges were sealed tight, painted perfectly to match the wall. On the door was a small numeric keypad, an electronic lock. I slid my fingers over the buttons, the plastic cool to the touch. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Why did Henry need this? Why didn't he tell me? Or more truthfully, why couldn't he tell me? I tried guessing mechanically, the way I used to solve engineering problems. Henry's birthday, no. His graduation date, no. The house number, no. I tried my wedding anniversary with Lucy, an old marital habit. The keypad flashed red in refusal. I swallowed hard. My palms were wet with sweat. I rested my forehead against the wall for a second and took a deep breath to steady myself. Then a thought flashed through my mind, equal parts absurd and painful. I entered my own birthday, the familiar numbers I had filled out on thousands of forms over my lifetime. A small click sounded, soft but unmistakable, like a lock releasing. I went still. In that moment, the room seemed to shrink. I reached out and pulled the door open slowly, afraid that even a little force might make everything vanish. Inside were not documents like I had expected, not passports, not mementos. It was money, stacks of cash arranged neatly, tightly, as if Henry had counted them over and over. I pulled one bundle out and stared at the pale green $100 bills, feeling like I was touching something that didn't belong to my world. I counted silently, then stopped because my throat closed up. The amount was so large I had to sit down on the floor. More than $180,000, not a few thousand set aside for emergencies. A large sum, hidden like a life-or-death secret. In the back corner were 3 small USB drives, each with a piece of tape and a handwritten number in marker. 1, 2, 3. Beneath them lay a clean white envelope, with my name written carefully on it. Charles. I stared at my name in my son's handwriting, and a strange sensation ran down my spine. It wasn't the grief of losing him like in the days before. It was something darker, heavier, like the sense that I was standing at the door of a room I had avoided my entire life. I opened the envelope. The paper inside was slightly wrinkled as if it had been handled many times. The smell of dry paper, ballpoint ink, and something familiar from Henry, like the scent of the hoodie he always wore. I recognized the handwriting immediately, but it wasn't like the birthday cards he used to write me. These lines were shaky, rushed, as if the writer feared time was running out. I read, "Dad, if you're reading this letter, it means something has happened to me." My heart skipped a beat. The words were short, but they hit like a punch to the gut. I blinked repeatedly, forcing my eyes to focus. The next line made me clamp a hand over my mouth. "Please find out the truth about Mom. Everything is in the USB drives. I was too afraid to tell you directly. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough. But if I disappear, you need to know that not everything is the way people will say it is." I reached that point and my vision blurred. I was sitting on the floor of my son's apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the bookcase I had just shoved aside, like a man who had fallen off a bridge with nothing to grab onto. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, to scream in rage, to deny everything as a final reflex of an old man who refused to let go of what he believed. But the letter was still in my hand, and it felt as heavy as stone. I kept reading, slowly, one word at a time. "Dad, don't believe everything Mom says. Don't blame yourself. You didn't kill me. I've always loved you, even if I didn't say it much. I just don't know what to do anymore." I folded the letter and pressed it to my chest. For the first time since the funeral, my tears came for real. Not because of the image of the casket, not because of the sound of dirt falling, but because of that sentence. "You didn't kill me." It felt like a hand pulling me out of the pit of guilt I had jumped into on my own. I looked up and around the apartment. White walls, a simple table, a ceiling light with a faint yellow glow. Everything was ordinary, almost frighteningly so. Henry had lived here. He had been afraid here. He had written those words here. And I, his father, had known nothing. My eyes drifted to the 3 USB drives. I hadn't plugged them in yet. I hadn't watched anything. And yet, the fact that Henry had needed to hide a safe, to leave behind a message like a last testament, was enough to shake my entire world. Lucy. I thought of my wife's face at the cemetery, her finger trembling while her voice stayed firm as a nail driven into wood. I thought of the way she had looked at me in recent days, cold like a stranger. I thought of how she took the insurance money and pushed me out of the house as if discarding an old piece of furniture. Pieces that had once seemed scattered suddenly lined up into a terrifying straight line. I crouched down and gathered the cash, the USB drives, and the letter. I didn't dare leave them there another minute. I was afraid someone else had a key. I was afraid Henry had been right to be afraid. And what chilled me the most was the truth that had finally surfaced. I was no longer sure who Lucy really was. I slipped the envelope into the inside pocket of my jacket. The 3 USB drives went into my pants pocket, pressed against my hip like some strange talisman. I put the money into a cloth bag I found in the kitchen cabinet and tied it tight. I closed the safe, pushed the metal door back into place, slid the bookcase back where it had been, trying to make everything look untouched. My hands were shaking, not from weakness, but from the feeling that I had just stepped into a game whose rules were written by someone else. I packed the last few necessities, locked Henry's apartment, and went down the stairs. Dusk had fallen. Streetlights flickered on, casting yellow pools across the sidewalk. I set the bag on the passenger seat of my car and stared at it as if it were a time bomb. As I started the engine, I heard myself whisper, my voice rough, as if I were speaking to Henry, as if I were speaking to the darkness inside the car. If my son was afraid of his own mother, then who have I been living with for the past 40 years? I drove back to the studio that night without music, without the radio. Just the steady sound of tires on asphalt and my own breathing. When I arrived, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I pulled the curtains closed and placed the bag of money and the USB drives on the table, like evidence in a case I wasn't ready to investigate yet. I sat down and stared at the 3 USB drives for a long time. Part of me wanted to plug one in immediately, to know the truth right now. Another part was frozen with fear, as if once I saw what was on them, I would never be able to go back to being the man I used to be. In the end, I opened the laptop. The screen lit up, reflecting a face that looked 10 years older than it had just weeks ago. I reached for the USB marked number 1. My fingertips were ice cold. And just as I was about to plug it in, my phone vibrated once, like a reminder that I wasn't alone in this story. It vibrated again, then went silent. On the screen was an unfamiliar number, not saved in my contacts. I stared at it for a few seconds, my finger hovering over the answer button, then pulled it back. My mind was stretched tight, and I didn't want any voice cutting in right now, especially when everything on the table in front of me was already enough to make my life unrecognizable. I silenced the phone and turned it face down, like putting a lid over my fear, then went back to the first USB drive. It lay there, small and harmless looking, yet I felt as if I were holding a block of explosives. I plugged it into the laptop. A soft click sounded. The screen flickered, then opened a folder with a name so simple it made my skin crawl. 6 months. Inside were dozens of video files, labeled by date. The numbers ran down the screen like a countdown calendar. I scrolled up and down, skimming the short file names, and my chest grew heavier with each second. Henry had recorded all of this during the last 6 months of his life. He had lived in fear, lucid enough to preserve evidence, desperate enough to prepare for the worst. I swallowed hard, tried to slow my breathing, but couldn't. I clicked on the first video. The screen stayed dark for a few seconds, then lit up. The image shook slightly, as if filmed secretly from a hidden angle. I recognized the private dining room of a restaurant Lucy and I had gone to a few times, the kind with white tablecloths and soft yellow lighting, where people spoke quietly so as not to break the illusion of elegance. Then Lucy appeared. Not Lucy in black at the cemetery, not Lucy with the grief-stricken face at the hospital, but Lucy in a fitted dress, hair neatly styled, red lipstick, bright eyes, looking 10 years younger. She leaned in, smiled, and placed her hand on the cheek of the woman sitting across from her. The woman turned her face, and I saw clearly a sharp, unfamiliar face, short hair, confident eyes. They looked at each other for a beat, and then Lucy kissed her. Not a polite kiss, a kiss I hadn't received in years. I sat frozen, feeling like someone had dumped a bucket of cold water over my head. They pulled apart, smiling softly. The other woman said something, and then I heard Lucy's voice clearly, as if she were sitting right next to me. "Marianne, you know, just a little bit more." Marianne Cole. The name came up again right after, in a half-joking, half-serious remark, like a code word only the two of them understood. A financial lawyer. I didn't know who she was. I had never heard Lucy mention any friend named Marianne, and I had certainly never heard Lucy's voice soften like that when she said anyone's name. In the video, they ordered more wine. They talked about accounts, about plans, about numbers that rolled off their tongues as smoothly as if they were negotiating a contract. I listened harder, and the more I heard, the more I understood why Henry had left that warning about the truth about Mom. "The boys' insurance money will give us enough momentum," Lucy said, her tone chillingly calm. "And then Charles's share, he just needs to fully collapse. Once he does, everything will slide right into my hands." Marianne gave a thin smile. "Is he really that easy to break?" Lucy took a sip of wine, her eyes flashing with a cunning I had never seen. "He always feels guilty. I just have to push in the right place. He'll convince himself he's the worst man alive. Men like that are easy to control." My throat burned as I listened. I remembered myself at the cemetery, standing silent. I remembered the damp studio and the cheap bourbon. I remembered the looks of contempt from others, and suddenly a thought rose as clear as headlights in fog. All of this may have been arranged. Marianne leaned in and lowered her voice, as if afraid of being overheard, but the camera captured every word. "What about Henry? About, does he know?" Lucy set her glass down, the sound of glass on table sharp and cold. She shrugged as if dismissing something trivial. "Henry is a risk." I clenched my fist until my nails dug into my palm. My son, the child I had held, walked to school, watched graduate, called a risk in that voice. Marianne frowned. "What if he talks?" Lucy smiled. Not the polite smile she gave neighbors, not the gentle smile she wore when opening birthday gifts. It was a soft, cold laugh, like metal brushing against metal. "He won't be able to talk." I froze. I thought I had misheard. I turned the volume up, my heart pounding. But no, the sentence was clear, casual, as if she were talking about locking a door or solving a minor problem. Marianne studied Lucy, curiosity and caution mixed in her eyes. "You're sure?" Lucy tilted her head, lips curling. "Sure. And once he's silent, we leave the United States. No one knows, no one looks. Where do you want to go?" Marianne replied dreamily, "Somewhere warm, with the ocean, and where lawyers don't dig so easily." Lucy smiled and lightly brushed Marianne's wrist, like a promise. I couldn't hear what came next. All the sound in the room seemed to fade away. I only saw Lucy's moving lips, her eyes, the way she sat calmly talking about the future, while my son. I slammed the video shut. The screen returned to the file list, dozens of files still sitting there, silent like unfired bullets. I couldn't move. My back went cold while my face burned, and even my breathing felt too loud in that tiny room. I had lived with that woman for more than 40 years. I had let her manage the money, the paperwork, the insurance, everything. I had believed in the image of a perfect family she built, believed it so completely that when she pointed at me at the cemetery, I didn't even have the strength to open my mouth. I played the video again, rewound to that moment. He won't be able to talk, as if punishing myself to be sure I wasn't imagining it. When the words came out again, unmistakably clear, something inside me finally broke. I slammed my hand down on the table. The glass of water shook, the laptop jolted. Anger surged like a wave of heat, washing away the numbness. "Lucy, what did you do to my son?" I shouted, my voice raw, sounding like it belonged to someone else. No one answered. The studio held only the hum of the ventilation fan and the sound of my own ragged breathing. But the question hung in the air, heavy, refusing to fall. I pressed my hand to my forehead, forcing myself to calm down. I couldn't act like a drunk man out of control. Henry had left these things for me to see, to understand, not so I would rush out and trap myself. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a few seconds, then opened them. I looked again at the folder. There wasn't just one video. There was a whole sequence of dates, meaning Henry had been watching them, recording them, or at least collecting something for months. And that meant he won't be able to talk, wasn't a careless remark. It was a plan. I touched the envelope in my jacket pocket, needing to feel that it was still there. Then I sat up straight, my eyes locked on the screen. If the first USB had only peeled back one mask, then the others were probably the part Henry had used all his fear to shield me from. I rested my finger on the mouse, ready to open the next video, and just then my phone vibrated again, this time repeatedly, like it was urgently trying to get my attention. The screen still showed the same unknown number as before, but now there was a short message that made my scalp tingle. "Are you Charles Miller? I think you should know. Lucy was just here asking about Henry's belongings." I stared at the message, feeling as if the air in the room had been squeezed out. Lucy had just been there asking about Henry's things. While I was sitting here, hands still shaking from what I had seen, she had already started searching, cleaning up, erasing traces. I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hello, this is Charles." On the other end was a middle-aged man's voice, slightly hoarse, the kind you hear from someone who has managed apartment buildings for years and dealt with all kinds of tenants. "Are you Charles Miller? I'm Gary, the building manager where Henry lived. I'm calling because something seemed off. A woman claiming to be Henry's mother came by and said she wanted to take a few things. I remembered you had been here this afternoon, so it didn't feel right." I gripped the phone tighter. "Is she still there?" "No, she left already, but she asked a lot of questions, asked if there was a safe, asked what you had taken. I told her I didn't know." "Are you okay, sir?" I closed my eyes for a second. In my head echoed the words, "Henry is a risk," and that cold laugh. "Gary, thank you for calling. If she comes back, don't let her in. Just tell her you'll only release anything to me. I'll be in touch." I hung up and set the phone down. In that moment, fear transformed into something else. It was no longer the shock of a man who had been deceived. It was the feeling of being hunted. Lucy knew, or at least she suspected I had found something. I turned back to the laptop. The files on the first USB were still there, but I wasn't calm enough to keep watching Lucy and Marianne laugh. I needed something else. I needed to hear Henry in his own voice. I needed to know what my son had lived through in his final days, and what he had been so afraid of that he hid money, hid USB drives, hid a final message. I pulled out the first USB, my hand still shaking slightly, and picked up the second one. Plugging it in felt like stepping deeper into a tunnel with no way back. A folder appeared, neatly named, carefully organized. Henry was always like that. Not messy, not impulsive. He did everything like writing a report, like building a case file. Inside were several subfolders, but one video file sat alone, not inside any folder. The file name was simply Dad. My chest tightened. I clicked. The screen lit up, this time showing Henry. He was facing the camera directly, as if looking straight at me through time. The light in his room was pale, washing over his hollow face and dark circles under his eyes. Henry looked thinner than I remembered. His shoulders slumped slightly, as if he had been carrying too much for too long. He took a breath, then spoke slowly, his voice hoarse but clear. "Dad, if you're watching this, then maybe I didn't get the chance to tell you in person anymore." I raised my hand to my mouth and held my breath. Henry swallowed hard, looked down for a moment, then lifted his eyes again as if trying not to break apart. "I'm sorry for staying silent for so long. I'm sorry for letting things go this far. There are some things I didn't want you to know, but I can't take them to the grave with me alone." He paused, gathering courage. 2 years ago, when I was still working at my old company, I got into debt because of gambling. I'm not proud of it. I panicked. I was stupid. I thought I could fix it and pay it back. I took $50,000 from the internal fund. It felt as if someone had slammed a door shut inside my chest, not out of disgust, but pain. Henry, my quiet son, had been fighting that battle alone, and I had never even asked. Henry looked straight into the camera, his eyes red but dry. "I planned to pay it back. I really did. But Mom found out. I don't know how. Maybe she went through my computer. Maybe she was watching me. I'm not sure. I just know that from that moment on, she held it over me like a noose." My heart sank as Henry continued, his voice dropping. She said, if I ever opened my mouth about Marianne, about what she was doing, she'd send me to prison. She said she'd call the company, the police. She said she'd ruin my life. Dad, I was scared. I closed my eyes. I thought of Lucy over the past 40 years, the woman who always spoke properly, who always knew how to make people trust her. I had never imagined she could say things like that to her own son. Henry wiped his face with the back of his hand, angry at himself for being weak. Then I started noticing other things. I noticed how Mom kept asking about your accounts, kept saying things like, "Let me handle it, it's easier." I started checking. "Dad, I'm sorry, but I secretly looked through the papers I could find, and I discovered she's been taking your money for years." I stopped breathing. Henry said the number like he was reading a verdict. More than $320,000. I jumped up from my chair, then collapsed back down as if all my strength had been drained. 320,000. I had worked my whole life. I believed the house, the paperwork, the savings were all fine because Lucy handled them so carefully. I thought I was bad with money, so it made sense to leave it all to my wife. While I was building bridges and roads, she was building another road, leading my money out of my life. On the screen, Henry went on, his voice suddenly faster. I hired a private investigator. I had to. I needed to know what Mom was doing, with whom, under what name, where the money was going. I was afraid if I asked her directly, she'd know I was suspicious. I collected documents, transfers, even photos. They're in the other folders. Dad, you have to look at everything. You have to. Henry paused, blinking rapidly, trying to stay composed. Then he said something that made my scalp go cold. But Dad, there's something worse. He glanced to the side as if he'd heard a noise in the apartment, then turned back quickly. In the past few weeks, Mom kept giving me what she called heart vitamins. She said I looked tired, said my heart was weak like Grandpa's. She made me take them in front of her. I pretended to swallow, then secretly threw them away. I didn't trust it. My throat burned. Henry continued, his voice much quieter now, each word hitting the floor like a dropped stone. Yesterday, I came back to my apartment, and I found the same bottle in my kitchen. I didn't buy it. Dad, Mom has a key. She can get into my place. I started feeling strange, my heart racing, my chest heavy. I went to get checked, and guess who I saw there? Our family doctor. He said it was nothing, just stress. But I looked into his eyes. I didn't believe him. Henry breathed fast, struggling to keep his voice steady. I gripped the edge of the table, my body burning. Dad, if one day they say I died of natural causes, don't believe it. I'm begging you. Don't believe it. He swallowed and looked straight into the camera. In his eyes, I saw something that hurt more than the betrayal itself. Henry was trying to protect me, even knowing he might not be able to save himself in time. I hid the money I managed to get back. Only part of it. I tried. I left everything for you because you're the only one who can do the right thing. Don't let Mom win. The video ended with a brief silence. Then the screen went black. I sat motionless, like I had just heard my son's true last words. Pieces of Henry's life suddenly became painfully clear. The short calls I had missed, the dinners I skipped because of work, the times I thought, he's grown, he can handle it. No, he couldn't handle it. He fought alone and he died while I believed in a natural cause story Lucy had built. I dragged my hand down my face as if trying to wipe away the last bit of innocence I had left. Then I looked to the side of the table where the 3 USB drives lay together. Henry said there were more folders, more documents, more images, more trails of money. And Lucy had just gone to Henry's apartment asking about the safe. She was racing against me. I took a deep breath and opened the folder next to the video labeled Dad. My hand moved the mouse toward a file named Transfers, and just then a small notification popped up on the laptop screen. The battery was running low. I didn't care about the battery. One thing was clear. If I slowed down even a little, Lucy would erase every trace, and Henry would die a second time, this time in complete silence. I plugged in the charger and opened the Transfers folder, just as Henry told me to. PDF files appeared, organized by month and year, neatly labeled like work records. I clicked on one statement, my eyes scanning lines of small transfers I would never have noticed before. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, once 12,000. Each amount left my account and went to a place I had never heard of. Next to each line, Henry had left small notes, as if talking to me from the other side of the screen. Dad was in Denver supervising a project this day. Signature doesn't match. Mom had the checkbook that day. My insides twisted. It wasn't just money that had been taken. The truth had been taken from me for years, inside the very home I thought was safe. I opened the documents folder next. Inside were account opening forms, power of attorney papers, loan documents, all bearing signatures terrifyingly similar to mine. Henry had attached photos of my real signature for comparison. When I placed them side by side, I finally saw the tiny differences, in the final hook of a stroke, in the angle of the letter C. Any expert could confirm it, but I had never looked because I trusted her. Then I saw the emails folder. I hesitated for a single beat. I knew whatever was inside would push everything from betrayal into crime. I clicked it open. Hundreds of emails were saved in threads. There were messages between Lucy and Marianne, discussing joint accounts, transfers, waiting for the right time. But another name appeared again and again that made my blood run cold. Dr. Howard Keene, our family doctor. The man who had shaken my hand in his office, asked about my work schedule, said Henry was just stressed. I stared at the name in disbelief and clicked on an email with a short, administrative-sounding subject line. The message wasn't long, but every sentence cut like a blade. Lucy wrote that Henry was difficult and starting to suspect. She asked about medication that could make Henry deteriorate over time while still looking like a natural decline. Doctor, Keene replied cautiously, then eventually agreed, insisting only that it be handled quietly and kept away from scrutiny. As I read, my hands went cold, as if the blood drained from my fingers. I scrolled through more emails. They discussed disguising it as heart vitamins. They mentioned genetics, Henry's grandfather, medical terms to make the story sound convincing. Lucy wrote one line that made me grip the edge of the table to keep from smashing the screen. After the funeral, I'll say in front of everyone that Charles killed our son with his neglect. He won't argue. He'll collapse on his own. I no longer heard the rain outside. I only heard my own heart pounding, cornered. I pushed back from the table and staggered into the tiny bathroom of the studio. I bent over the sink, gasping. Nausea rose, not from alcohol, but from a truth too filthy for my body to accept. I dry-heaved, shaking, then braced myself against the sink like an old man just knocked down. When I returned to the table, I forced myself to continue. Henry had gone to the very end to bring me here. I had no right to stop. I opened a video file in the evidence folder. Security camera footage appeared, shot from a low angle, as if hidden somewhere in the kitchen. I immediately recognized my own kitchen. The stone countertop, the coffee jar, the mug rack with Henry's college logo. And Lucy. She stood there, calm to the point of horror. In her hands were things I couldn't fully make out. She prepared something with calm, practiced motions, like it was part of an ordinary routine. Then she made coffee, 2 cups side by side. She kept one. She sprinkled the powder into the other and stirred lightly. The door opened. Henry walked in. His face, still my son's face, gentle, trusting, saying something cheerfully. He leaned down, kissed his mother's cheek, picked up the familiar cup, and took a long drink. I jumped to my feet, the chair screeching. I wanted to knock the cup from his hand, to scream at him to stop, but it was only a video of something already done. My son finished the drink, then smiled. Lucy watched him drink like someone watching a plan stay on schedule. I shut off the video, my hand pressed against my chest as if my own heart was hurting the way Henry's had, without anyone saving him. I opened an audio file. Lucy and Marianne's voices were clear in a nighttime conversation. Marianne asked if she was sure. Lucy replied that Dr. Keene said 1 or 2 more days, and Henry's heart would fail, that she would be the one to call emergency services, that she would cry, perform. Then she repeated the plan to put all the blame on me, exactly as she had done at the cemetery. I sank into my chair, my back stiff. The full picture came together, horrific and precise. Henry hadn't died suddenly. He was killed slowly, in small doses, with sweet words, with a doctor willing to sign papers on request. I remembered the hospital saying cardiac arrest in his sleep. I remembered Dr. Keene standing there, solemn, a hand on Lucy's shoulder. I remembered the death certificate signed quickly, like routine paperwork. I had believed it because I was too exhausted to doubt. I stared at the scanned signature Henry had saved. Howard Keene. That signature was no longer just a doctor's name. It was a stamp on my son's fate. I lowered my head, my breath hissing through my teeth. I didn't sob. I just felt a cold rush down my spine, and a sentence slipped out so softly it felt like I was afraid to hear myself say it. She didn't just kill my son. She scheduled his death. The words dissolved into the damp air of the studio. I sat there a few more seconds, staring at the dark screen, then stood up like a machine switched back on. If I stayed buried in drink, if I let guilt drag me down, Lucy would win exactly as she planned. I went straight to the small kitchen corner and pulled the cheap bottle of bourbon from the cabinet. The sharp smell of alcohol hit my nose. I didn't think. I opened it and poured everything down the sink. The amber liquid flowed away like a piece of my life I was cutting off myself. I turned the faucet on full blast until the smell disappeared. Then I went back to the table, plugged an old external hard drive into the laptop, and began backing everything up. Folder by folder, email by email, video by video, slowly and carefully, checking twice the way I used to on job sites before pouring concrete. Henry had left me one last bridge. I had to keep it standing. When the backup finished, I shut the laptop down, placed the USB drives into a small zip bag, wiped off fingerprints with a paper towel. I took a thick envelope, put printed copies of key statements and emails inside, and wrote on the front in my clumsy, slanted handwriting, "If something happens to me." I didn't want to think about it, but I no longer had the luxury of innocence. I split everything up. One USB went into a toolbox in the trunk of my car, under old wrenches. Another went into a hardcover book, hollowed out in the middle like a magic trick. The last USB I kept in my jacket pocket, close to my body, like carrying Henry's heartbeat with me. When it was done, I sat down and scrolled through my contacts. Henry had mentioned Daniel Ross, his close friend, in a few brief lines I hadn't paid attention to. I found the number in an old saved message. I called. It rang twice before someone answered, a young man's voice, cautious. "Hello? This is Charles Miller, Henry's father," I said slowly, keeping myself steady. "I need to see you, tonight, if possible." There was a long pause. Then Daniel exhaled as if making a difficult decision. "You know, don't you?" I swallowed. "I know enough that I can't sit still anymore." "Henry, he tried to tell you something, didn't he?" Another pause, then Daniel spoke quietly. "Come to Maple and Oak Cafe, 7th Street corner, 1 hour." I put on my coat and hat and stepped out of the studio. The cold night air cut into my face and cleared my head. As I drove, I realized my hands had stopped shaking. In their place was a hollow focus, like the moment you have to decide what to do on an unfinished construction site. Maple and Oak was still open. Yellow light spilled onto the glass windows. Daniel sat at a table against the wall, back straight, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He looked exhausted, his eyes red as if he hadn't slept in days. I sat across from him. Daniel looked at me for a moment, then spoke plainly. "Henry called me late one night. He said he was scared. He said his mom wasn't like his mom anymore." I clenched my hands under the table. "Did he say anything specific?" Daniel shook his head, then nodded as if remembering. "He said she was forcing him to take vitamins. He said his heart felt strange. He told me he went to get checked, but the doctor, Keene, said it was nothing. Henry told me, 'If I die, don't believe it.'" Hearing those words again from someone else's mouth hurt like a punch to the stomach. Daniel lowered his head, his voice rough. I thought he was overthinking. I told him to move, change the locks, call the police. He said he couldn't. He had something from his past being held over him. He was afraid his life would be ruined before he could prove anything. I closed my eyes. He tried to do it alone. Daniel nodded, then reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a cream-colored envelope, the edge slightly wrinkled. My name was written on it in Henry's handwriting. "He gave this to me 2 days before he died," Daniel said. "He told me that if anything happened, I had to put it directly in your hands. I got scared after the funeral. When Lucy screamed at the cemetery, everyone looked at you like you were guilty. I thought if I gave it to you, I'd get dragged into it. I was a coward." I didn't blame him. I just took the envelope, feeling like I was holding a piece of my son's soul. I opened it right there at the table. Inside was a short letter and a small key with a numbered tag. Henry had written quickly but clearly. "Dad, trust Daniel. If you need something else that no one can deny, this key opens a bank safe deposit box. I put everything else there." I looked at Daniel. "Do you know which bank?" Daniel nodded. "There's an address on the back of the tag." I looked, because I was afraid it might get lost. I flipped the tag over, a bank branch downtown. I folded the letter back up carefully, like something fragile. "Come with me," I said. Daniel looked at me, then nodded immediately. No more hesitation. We got to the bank before they closed. I signed my name, showed my ID, my hands stiff but no longer shaking. An employee brought out a cold metal box. When the lid opened, the smell of old paper and metal mixed together. Inside were neatly clipped stacks of documents, several printed color photos, and another USB drive, smaller, without a label. I looked through the photos first. Lucy and Marianne standing in front of a hotel. Lucy stepping out of a car, hair polished, a designer bag in her hand. Photos of them sitting together in a restaurant. Photos of them together at a marina. Each one had dates, locations, like a surveillance file. I opened the stack of papers. Transaction copies, meeting logs, short notes from the private investigator Henry had hired. Detailed enough that no one could dismiss it as the imagination of a grieving son. I put everything back neatly and took a deep breath. I had a mountain of evidence, but I wasn't the one who knew how to turn it into handcuffs. I needed someone experienced, someone Lucy couldn't manipulate. On the way out of the bank, I took out my phone and called a name Daniel mentioned as we stepped onto the sidewalk. "Margaret Sloan," Daniel said. "Criminal attorney. She's handled big cases. She's not easily intimidated." I dialed. It rang, then a low, efficient female voice answered. "Sloan's office." "My name is Charles Miller," I said, staring straight at the street as if looking at my life-changing direction. "I need to see you. I have evidence related to my son's death." Margaret Sloan met me in a low office building near downtown, the kind with no flashy sign but where everyone instinctively lowers their voice when they walk in. She was in her early 50s, hair cut short, eyes sharp like someone who had seen too many lies to believe in raw emotion. I placed the document box on her desk and slid it toward her. Daniel sat beside me, silent, like a witness sworn not to speak more than necessary. Margaret went through everything slowly. She didn't gasp or visibly frown. Her eyes lingered a bit longer on the emails between Lucy and Dr. Howard Keene, then on the kitchen video. When she finished, she closed the laptop and placed both hands on the desk. "You have a lot of evidence," she said evenly. "But if you want this to move quickly and not be twisted into a story about a delusional, grieving husband, we need one more thing." I swallowed. "What do you want?" "A confession," Margaret said without hesitation. "At least a partial one, so when she changes her story and blames the doctor or the lover, we still have her own words." My throat went dry. "I have to see Lucy again?" "You have to make her talk," Margaret said, her eyes fixed on mine. "No arguing, no raised voice. Don't read her an indictment. Let her think you're weak, broken, coming to beg for the truth so you can find peace. People like her enjoy watching you kneel." I stayed quiet for a moment. Then I nodded, because I knew she was right. Lucy had lived beside me for 40 years, and she was best at one thing, turning other people into the guilty ones. Margaret handed me a small, thin device, no bigger than a spare button. "Clip it to your jacket or collar. It records clearly. Remember one thing, ask open questions. Don't finish her sentences, and once she starts talking, don't interrupt." I left her office and stood in the parking lot for a few seconds. Cold wind slipped down my collar. I zipped my jacket up and looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My face had aged years in a matter of weeks, but there was something in my eyes that hadn't been there before. Clarity. That night, I drove to the house that used to be mine. I didn't call ahead. I didn't text. I parked a short distance away, checked the recording device, then walked straight up the steps. The living room light was on. A shadow moved behind the curtains, as if life inside was still going on normally, and I was the erased part. I rang the doorbell, waited, footsteps, a lock turning. The door opened. Lucy stood there in a new outfit, hair dyed a lighter color, expensive perfume in the air. She looked me up and down, not surprised, just annoyed, like I was a stain that had reappeared. "What do you want?" she said coldly. I took a deep breath. "I need to talk. About Henry." Something flickered across her face, so fast I almost thought I imagined it. Then Lucy curled her lip. "There's nothing to talk about." "I'm just asking for 5 minutes," I said, softening my voice. "I've been thinking." She studied me for another moment, weighing how much trouble I could still cause. Finally, she shifted aside and opened the door wider. 5 minutes, then get out." I stepped inside. Everything felt familiar and foreign at the same time. New items on the shelves, a painting I had never seen, and the old family photos were gone, as if they had never existed. Lucy sat on the sofa. I chose the chair opposite, keeping distance, keeping my breathing steady. The recording device pressed against my chest like a cold stone. Lucy crossed her arms. "Talk." I lowered my head as if searching for words. "At the cemetery? You were right." I looked up, letting my eyes glisten just enough. I was indifferent. I missed too much. I wasn't there for Henry." Lucy watched me, something frightening lighting up in her eyes. She leaned back, relaxing like someone listening to a favorite song. "So, you finally understand," she said slowly. "You could build 1,000 bridges and it wouldn't matter. Your son died and you still stood there like a piece of wood." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep my voice steady. "I just want to know, at the end, did he suffer?" Lucy tilted her head slightly, thinking as if she were telling someone else's story. "Of course he did. Everyone suffers. But you know what? He deserved it. He lived alone because of you. Loneliness kills." I nodded, like I was accepting a sentence. Then I shifted gently, as if by accident. I went to Henry's apartment to pack his things. I found some things that confused me. Lucy looked at me, the corner of her eye tightening. "What things?" "I found a safe behind the bookcase," I said evenly. "Inside there was money, and other items. I don't understand why he hid them like that." Lucy shot to her feet too fast. For a split second, the mask slipped. "You went through his stuff?" "He was my son," I said quietly. I don't know what he was afraid of." Lucy took a breath and pulled herself back together. She walked slowly around the room, gathering control. When she turned to face me again, her eyes were icy. "You've always been good at playing the victim," she said. "Now you're acting like the repentant father?" I stayed silent, letting her talk, letting her trip over her own words. Lucy let out a dry, papery laugh. "Do you really think I killed my son just for money?" She stood there, that thin smile still on her lips, like she had just made a clever joke. I stayed seated, letting the silence stretch just a little longer, enough for her to think she was still in control. "I don't think," I said softly. "I just want to hear it from you, because there are nights I can't sleep. I keep asking myself, who was I really living with?" Lucy folded her arms, her gaze sharp. "You lived with a woman who was neglected for 40 years. You want the truth? Fine." She stepped closer, leaned down slightly like she was sharing a secret. "Yes, I have, Marianne. At least she looks at me like a human being, not a shadow in a kitchen. And yes, I took money. From your accounts. Little by little. That money is what I deserved after a lifetime married to a man who only cared about construction sites." I kept my face neutral, but against my chest the recorder felt hot. I let her continue. "And Henry?" I asked, my voice so low it was almost to myself. "Our son." Lucy smirked. "Henry was a problem. He found out. He threatened to talk. He thought doing the right thing would save you." She laughed, short and cold. "He didn't understand the game." I swallowed. "So, what did you do to him?" Lucy looked at me like I was slow. "I didn't do anything directly," she shrugged. "I just created the conditions. Someone else handled the technical part. I just made sure everything went smoothly, like a heart attack. Who would doubt it? The doctor signs, the paperwork's done, the funeral, and then I stand there and say a few words, and you collapse." My throat tightened, but I nodded, like I was confessing. "You used me as the excuse." "Of course," Lucy said, her eyes shining with satisfaction. "You're always too late, Charles. Too late when your son died. Too late when the marriage died. Too late when the truth died. You're only good at standing there and watching." I took a deep breath and touched the spot where the button was, like adjusting my collar. In reality, I was making sure the device was recording every word. Lucy kept talking, her voice more and more smug. "I got tired of waiting for you to die slowly from work, so I pushed things faster. Freedom doesn't just fall into your lap. You take it." I looked up at her, really looked at her, for the first time without begging. "Thank you." She froze. "What?" I stood up slowly and straightened my jacket. "For saying everything I needed to hear." The color drained from Lucy's face in an instant. What are you talking about?" I took out my phone, lit the screen without calling anyone, just letting her see how calm I was. "Everything you just admitted has been recorded. Every sentence, every word." Lucy lunged forward, her hand jerking as if to grab my jacket. "No, that's not possible." I stepped back half a step, my voice low and clear. "Calm down. Everything you just said is recorded. My attorney already has copies, and the police will have them tonight." Lucy went pale, her lips parting without a sound. In that moment, for the first time in my life, I saw real fear on that woman's face. I didn't stay to watch Lucy collapse or scream. I turned and walked out of that house like I was leaving a sealed room I'd been trapped in for 40 years. My hand shook as I opened the car door, but my mind felt strangely clear. I called Margaret right there in the parking lot, my voice rough. "She talked," I said. "Enough." Margaret didn't ask for details. "Come straight to my office, don't go back to your apartment, and don't let anyone follow you." Daniel was already waiting on the corner, just as we'd planned. When I saw him, I realized I'd been holding my breath for too long. He got into the passenger seat and glanced at me quickly, like asking, "Are you okay?" without saying it. I just shook my head. Not okay. But it had begun. In the office, Margaret played a short portion of the recording, then shut it off. She didn't need to hear more to know how strong it was. She called a prosecutor she knew, her voice firm, decisive, like stamping a document. Everything moved faster than I expected. I signed papers, handed over copies of the USB drives, emails, videos, statements, and the recording. I watched the files pass into other hands, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. Evidence of my son's death, now sealed inside thick envelopes with red stamps. Early the next morning, my phone rang. Margaret. "They've been arrested?" she said. "All of them." I sat straight up in the cheap hotel bed, my heart pounding. "Lucy?" She was taken while preparing to leave the house, Mary Ann too, and Dr. Howard Keene. He tried to deny it, but once he saw the emails and heard the recording, he went quiet. I ended the call and sat there for a long time, staring at the gray light outside the window. I thought I'd feel triumph. Instead, the first thing that hit me was nausea, the same feeling as the night I realized Henry had been poisoned slowly. Justice doesn't bring your child back. It only puts the truth where it belongs. The news exploded that same day. A name that used to be just my wife's became a headline on screens. Neighbors, acquaintances, people who had looked at me with contempt at the funeral now turned to pity and apologies. I didn't answer anyone. I didn't need them. I only needed Henry. A few weeks later, they requested an exhumation for a new autopsy. I thought I had cried myself empty, but standing on that cold ground, watching them do it, I still had to grip Daniel's arm to keep from falling. I didn't look for long. I just bowed my head and whispered an apology I should have said while my son was still alive. The results came like a hammer, even though I already knew. Toxins in the tissue, clear evidence of repeated administration over time. Not cardiac arrest in his sleep. Not fate, not genetics, human hands. The case went to court quickly because the evidence was overwhelming and clean. I sat in the front row, back straight, eyes fixed on Lucy. She no longer had the elegance she'd worn in the living room. No perfume, just a rigid face and calculating eyes. Marianne sat not far away, cold, like someone weighing escape routes. Dr. Keene was different. He stared at the floor, shoulders slumped, like a man who knew he had fallen. When the prosecutor played the recording, Lucy's voice filled the courtroom, clear and merciless. Hearing it again made my ears ring. Someone in the room gasped softly. Someone else turned away. I didn't. I forced myself to look straight ahead because Henry had looked straight into the camera when he recorded himself. The jury didn't take long. When the verdict was read, I only caught a few words as if through water. Murder, accomplice, fraud, forgery. Lucy was sentenced to life in prison. Marianne received a sentence for her role as an accomplice and for covering it up. Dr. Keene received a reduced sentence for cooperating, but he still paid with years behind bars and a name forever tied to guilt. Lucy looked at me once, very quickly, as if searching for a crack to slip through. I didn't give her that. I just looked back calmly, and inside me there was only one thought. Henry, I didn't get there in time to save you, but I didn't let them bury the truth with you. After the trial, the surface of my life slowly returned to order, but inside it didn't. The house was returned to me, the stolen money was frozen and gradually recovered. People told me I should be happy because I had won. I just nodded. Winning or losing didn't bring Henry back to the dinner table, didn't give me back the years I let flow by like water. I sold the house not long after. Every corner felt like it held my son's voice calling out to me, voices I hadn't heard when I should have. I moved into a small apartment near downtown, close to where Henry had lived. I made myself walk every morning, drink black coffee, go to bed on time. Daniel still came by. He didn't say much, but he was always there, like a post keeping me from falling. Then, one afternoon, as I was sitting in Margaret's office signing a final document, my phone vibrated. An unknown number. I answered, and a man's voice came through, polite and stiff, like reading from a script. "Mr. Charles Miller? I'm a warden at the state prison. Lucy Miller has requested to see you." I thought I'd misheard. "See me for what?" "She says she has important information," he replied. "And according to her medical file, she's seriously ill. Terminal cancer. Doctors estimate only a few months left." I hung up and looked at Margaret. She looked back at me like she already knew life was never going to let me rest completely. "You're not obligated to go," she said. "But if you do, go to close it out, and let me prepare protections for you. People like her, even when they're dying, they may still try to take one last bite." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, watching streetlights spill through the curtains, thinking about Henry, thinking about Lucy's smile in the living room the night I set the trap. The next morning, I drove to the prison, past steel fences and security gates, past the smell of disinfectant and the sound of metal doors opening and closing. Lucy walked into the visiting room slowly. She was so thin she was almost unrecognizable. The prison uniform hung loosely on her. Her hair was streaked with gray, her skin yellowed. But her eyes were still the same. Alert, calculating, as if illness had weakened her body but not her habit of manipulation. I sat down across from her, a cold metal table between us. A guard stood in the corner. "I didn't think you'd come," Lucy said, her voice hoarse. "I'm here to listen," I replied. "Go ahead." Lucy looked down at her thin hands, then let out a sound that was almost a laugh. "You want the final truth? Not what Henry left behind, not what you pieced together, but the truth I never said." I didn't rush her. I let her slide down her own slope. "Henry bought the insurance," Lucy said. "You think he just decided that on his own? I told him to, 3 years ago. I said everyone should have it, just in case. I helped him choose the policy, then convinced him to list me as the beneficiary. I told him it would be simpler, less paperwork, fewer taxes. He trusted me, Charles. He trusted his mother." My heart clenched. 3 years. That meant before Henry ever discovered Marianne, before my son trembled in those videos begging for help. "So you planned to kill him even then?" I asked, my voice strangely calm. Maybe because I had no room left for surprise. Lucy nodded slightly. At first it was just a thought, a lifeline. I wanted freedom. I wanted to leave, and I needed money. Then when he found out about Marianne, when he threatened to tell you, it became just a matter of timing. I clenched my hands under the table. I didn't let her see me shake. I didn't give her that final sense of victory. Lucy watched me, waiting for me to collapse. When I didn't, she changed tactics. "But I didn't call you here just so you'd hate me more. I called because there's someone else." I looked up, locking eyes with her. "Who?" Lucy tilted her head, savoring the moment of pulling the string. "Your former partner, Robert Hayes, the one you trusted more than me. You remember him, don't you?" The air in the room seemed to freeze. A face appeared instantly in my mind. A handshake, years of job sites and contracts. A man who had sat in my kitchen many times. A man who had held Henry when he was little. "No," I said out loud. "That's not possible." Lucy smiled faintly, coughed once, then continued. "It is. He helped me. Not with the drugs, with the money, the signatures, the accounts, those small transfers you never noticed because you were always too busy. He knew the process. He knew how you signed. He knew when you were out of town." My throat tightened. "Why?" "Because he needed money," Lucy said bluntly. "Debt, gambling. His company was failing. I paid him, he did the work. He kept a share. A big one." I sat still, staring down at the metal tabletop, as if looking up would make the world collapse again. Henry didn't know. It wasn't in the USBs. That meant the man had stayed far enough in the shadows that my son never managed to reach him. "What do you get by telling me this?" I asked. Lucy looked straight at me, her eyes hollow but sharp. "I'm dying. I have no reason to protect anyone anymore. And I can't stand the idea that I'm the only one paying while he keeps living as a loyal friend." I stood up, the chair scraping softly. The guard glanced at me, but I nodded to show I was in control. I looked at Lucy one last time. She seemed about to say something else, her lips moving, but I didn't allow it. I turned and walked out, passing through steel doors like walking through layers of lies. In the parking lot, cold wind slapped my face. I took out my phone and called Margaret immediately. "I need you," I said. "There's another name, and if it's real, I won't let him get away." Margaret was silent for a brief moment, then her voice sharpened. Come to my office. We start with the data. If there's a trail, we'll pull it out. 3 months later, the trail surfaced. Transfers routed through a shell company. Deleted emails thought unrecoverable. Numbers that matched with chilling precision. When the arrest warrant was signed, I didn't go to watch. I didn't need to see handcuffs to know justice had moved. I sat in my office looking at an old photo of Henry, understanding that my son had pulled me out of the dark in time, even though he had paid with his life. On the day the court sentenced that betrayer, I stood at the back of the room, silent. When he turned and looked at me with hatred in his eyes, I answered with the simplest truth. "You chose this," I said. "Now you pay." After everything ended, silence arrived like an empty room. No more non-stop phone calls, no more meetings with lawyers, no more nights staring at a laptop until my eyes burned. Just me, an old man, and the space where Henry had once stood in my life. I received all my assets back by court order. The stolen funds were recovered, the shadow accounts closed, the records restored to my name. People said I was lucky to still have money, to still have property. All I thought was that I would trade it all to hear my son's voice in the kitchen one more time. I returned to the old house one late afternoon when the sunlight had faded. No Lucy, no footsteps on the stairs. The house was almost too clean, like a place scrubbed to erase evidence. I walked through the living room, looked at the chair where I used to sit reading project files, looked at the wall where family photos once hung. Pale rectangular marks showed where frames had been removed. Everything made one thing clear. I couldn't live there anymore. Not out of fear, but because the memories would keep my feet chained. I sold the house within 2 months. On the day I signed the transfer papers, my hands didn't shake. It felt like closing a door I should have closed long ago. The door of a life spent building things meant to last in concrete while neglecting the most fragile thing of all, a home filled with laughter. I bought a small apartment near downtown, not far from the cemetery and close to where Henry had lived. I liked being able to walk to the corner cafe, order a black coffee, watch people go to work, hear buses pull in, feel that life was still moving. Daniel stayed close, never loud, never showy, just there when it mattered. One evening, Daniel brought over a box of items left from Henry's old apartment that I hadn't had the strength to look through. Inside were notebooks, printed investigation files, and a stack of papers with a title written by Henry himself. "If Dad Wants to Do Something Decent." The handwriting was steady, though smudged in places as if damp. I read each line slowly. Henry wrote about what he had observed. Psychological abuse often leaves no bruises, living instead in looks, in words, in financial control, in isolation. He listed places people could seek help, types of evidence worth saving, questions to ask yourself when someone close begins to change. At the bottom of the page, Henry wrote a line that made me set the papers down and breathe deeply. "Dad, if you couldn't be my father while I was alive, be a father to someone who needs to be believed." That night, I sat for a long time by the window, watching the city lights. I had lived nearly 70 years and had never felt my purpose so clearly. Not because I wanted to be a hero, but because I couldn't bear the thought of Henry leaving behind only a stack of files and a cold grave. I met with Margaret and Daniel, then with several social workers Margaret introduced me to. I used most of the recovered money to establish a fund in Henry Miller's name. Not a flashy foundation with gala dinners, but something that could work immediately. Legal consultation support, temporary housing assistance, investigative costs for people who sensed something was wrong but didn't know where to begin. We set up a hotline, partnered with local organizations, and hired a small, full-time team. I'm not good at talking about feelings with strangers, but I am persistent. I go to the office every morning and listen to each story. A middle-aged woman says her husband controls every account, cuts her cards, won't let her buy medicine. An elderly father says his children are pressuring him to sign over his house because he's forgetful now. A young man says his mother loves him in a way that makes him afraid to breathe. I realized Henry's tragedy wasn't rare. It was just hidden behind the shell of a respectable family. In the first year, our fund helped hundreds of cases. Some people only needed a phone call to learn how to document evidence and find a safe place. Some needed lawyers. Some needed someone to tell them they weren't crazy, that their sense of being manipulated was real. Every time we helped someone get out, I felt like Henry was standing behind me, saying nothing, just nodding. Exactly 1 year after the fund was established, we held a small gathering at a community hall. No grand stage, just a wooden podium and rows of chairs. I stood before people of all ages. Some had cried on the phone with me. Some I only knew from files. They applauded when Margaret introduced the fund, when Daniel spoke about Henry as a good friend. When it was my turn, I held the microphone, my hands slightly cold. I looked down at Henry's photo on the table, his smile as gentle as ever. I took a breath and spoke slowly, each word placed like a stone. My son did not die in vain. The hall fell silent for a moment. Then the applause rose, not loud but steady and warm, like a promise. I didn't cry then. I just felt my chest lighten, as if, after so many years, I had finally built a real bridge, one connecting the pain of a single family to the hope of many others. As I stepped down, an elderly woman took my hand, her eyes red. She said, "Thank you for believing me." I squeezed her hand, and in my head I heard Henry's voice from those final videos. Don't let her win. I understood then that real victory doesn't live in a verdict. It lives in staying alive to do the right thing and using the rest of my life to protect those trapped in silence, the way Henry once was. I stood at Henry's grave on a quiet morning when dew still clung to the grass and the city hadn't fully woken. The headstone was simple, carved with his name, his birth date, and his death date. I placed my hand on the cold stone and told him the journey, as if he were standing beside me, listening with that familiar smile. I told him about the truth brought into the light, about the nights I was learning to sleep again, about the people helped by what he left behind. A light wind moved through the trees, and in that moment, my heart no longer felt unsteady. Lucy died in prison on a rainy night, quietly, with no one by her side. I was notified a few days later. There was no farewell letter, no apology. I didn't go to claim the ashes. I didn't forgive, and I didn't need to in order to move forward. Forgiveness is not a requirement for justice. There are boundaries that, once crossed, leave silence as the only choice. I understand one thing very clearly. Justice does not erase loss. It doesn't bring back the sound of my son's footsteps on the stairs, doesn't restore the dinners I missed, doesn't fill the gaps in memory. But justice puts the truth in its rightful place, so the living don't have to carry another lie. And sometimes that is enough to stand upright again. The story you've just heard is fictional, inspired by real-life situations and human experiences. It isn't told to provoke or target any individual or organization, but to remind us of something very real. Abuse doesn't always leave bruises on the skin. It can live in belittling words, in financial control, in the fear of isolation, in the feeling of always needing permission to be yourself. If your intuition speaks, trust it. Document what you can, keep yourself safe, and seek legal, professional, or trusted help. No one deserves to be trapped in silence. Thank you for staying until the final moments of this story. If it resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. A simple share can help these messages reach someone who needs to hear them most. I appreciate every moment you spent listening, and I hope that somewhere out there you'll choose to stand on the side of truth and compassion. See you in the next stories.